Hi everyone, I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and today we are going to dye some self-striping yarn. Now I've already created a really long skein on my warping board. This is actually wrapped up 8 times. The skein is so long, it is over 11 yards around. That is huge and perfect for us to try to do a 3-colored self-striping yarn. I've done 2-color self-striping yarns a few times, but today I want to try to divide it up for 3 and see how things go. Now today's video is sponsored by Anne. Anne, I hope you are so excited for this yarn. I am beyond excited to create it for you. If you would like to learn how you as a viewer can sponsor an episode of Dyepot Weekly, get 100 grams of hand-dyed yarn in the process, plus shout-outs in the video, you can find a link to the sponsorship listing in the ChemKnits Creations Etsy shop, in the video description and in the top right-hand card. I'd also like to thank Dyer Supplier for sending me some yarn to test out and review, and also helping me acquire the supplies and encouraging me to create a DIY warping board. Some content talking more about the warping board will be coming up on the future, but now I'm going to insert a little bit on how I made this skein. Alright, so I started off on this peg by just tying a little bit of a slip knot to secure the yarn. And then I started going around. I made this niddy noddy with Keith using some 3-foot railing balusters that I got at Home Depot. And then we drilled in a bunch of 1/2-inch holes and put these 5-inch dowels into it with some wood glue. It is completely collapsible. I can show you guys that in a minute. Each of these balusters is 3 feet. So what I'm winding today is about a 12-yard skein. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and these 2 at the end make about 6, and since we're going back and forth, it's about 12 yards, approximately. The skein will snap back a little bit once we, the skein will snap back a little bit once you remove it, because there is some tension here, but it's not too bad. And I will say, even without these ends glued together, they aren't twisting in as much as I might expect that they would. And so yes, I am going back and forth and back and forth, and in the end this will separate to be a full skein, and I'm pretty amazed that it does work like that. But the important thing is that on either end I go under as I wrap the yarn to change directions. And some other people might prefer to, rather than going back and forth, go up and down and then around. There's different ways you can do it. I think I watched a long time ago a video that involved going back and forth like this, and I don't know, I like the rhythm of it. And as you get going, you can get a little bit faster. You'll find the rhythm that works best for you. I prefer to start off with the yarn in a yarn cake instead of having it, for example, on a swift, because as I am pulling the yarn at different rates, when I tried this at first with a swift, I found that it just got, like, the yarn got caught, and I spent time sort of like untangling it on the swift a little bit. And doing it like this, I don't really need to. But when we made the niddy noddy, I went for supplies that would require as little cutting as possible. Supplies that would allow us to drill into it and have a pretty thick, robust dowel. I wanted dowels versus screws because I didn't want something that would catch the yarn. I did sand the dowels after we cut them. But in theory, if you don't have a saw, you could ask Home Depot to cut the dowels for you. Sometimes they might charge per cut, but it is something that they could do. And I wanted something collapsible. And so this is what we came up with. At some point I will probably do a more comprehensive tutorial, but I wanted to do something fairly quick just to show you guys how I have been using this. I start off at this back end, not the end where I tied one end, but the other end, and I add a zip tie as the first tie. And then we can go through and start pulling the skein apart. I'm also going to add a butterfly tie to the other side I removed. I aim for approximately at least one per yard. And now, sort of continuing here, things are still sort of grouped together, but you can pull, leaving one sort of on the warping board and pulling the other. And coming up here, they should continue to separate with ease. As we come down to that beginning end, this is the one place where things can feel a little tricky because you're like, oh wait, this feels like a little tangled. But I find if I pull this off and pull that end that I butterflied off, you see things look like a little looped just with some light tugs. Sometimes pulling it apart, but it resolves itself nicely. We are gonna dye some self-striping yarn that has a tiny bit of an oops to it. This long skein is about a 12-yard circle, except for two places where the yarn changed direction midstream. These happened in the same place. I was able to tie those two ends together, but yeah, so that's two places where it may change directions, and depending on how and where we dye this yarn, that could cause an issue with the pattern. So yeah, but we're gonna go for this and cross our fingers. This yarn is Dyer Supplier's 80-20 sock yarn. It is 80% superwash merino, 20% nylon. I have divided this skein into 3 approximately equal pieces. And I did it off camera because it's long and I think it would have been hard to fit it all in the frame. But starting with that end where we had the tiny mistake, but I have it looped together, so hopefully it shouldn't affect the striping pattern because we have that all as one end in equals. All these pieces will be equally sized. So fingers crossed on that. But we took it and then we divided the remaining long portion in half and sort of adjusted it as needed. And so now, just to show you, we have 3 almost equal size pieces. Okay, so this one's a tad bit shorter than the other 2, but we should end up with 3 similarly sized stripes. Today we are going to use these 2-quart mason jars to dye the yarn, and then we will set them inside a pan at the same time so they can get heat. And the way that this will work is that we will put one of the stripe sections into each of these jars and sort of overlap the color a tiny bit in those intermediate areas. I took a removable zip tie to mark that center, and this is all the points where they overlap, and I will remove this after I have the yarn in the jars initially set up, ready to go. So fingers crossed that this will work out. The yarn has plenty of ties around it all over the rest, but this one zip tie will just help keep things organized as we pre-soak. You could divide things up while it's wet, but I think it was much easier for me to manage while the yarn was dry. When I say that I haven't tried this technique before, I mean that I haven't attempted to do a 3-stripe repeating self-striping yarn. I have definitely played around with using mason jars to make a gradient using 5 connected mini skeins. Technically, that is self-striping. They're just really, really big stripes. So this is a little different and a different way to deal about and manage the fiber. Anyway, I am going to pre-soak this yarn for at least 30 minutes at room temperature in plain tap water with no vinegar. I'm sorry for not including a full warping board tutorial in this video. There is a vlog coming of how Keith and I made the warping board at some point. Not really a tutorial, but I did take some footage of the process when we were making it, and it was really easy to construct for people that have limited woodworking skills. And so I will be breaking that all down in the future. Today I want to play with a color palette that's bright, summery, and fun. So we are going to use some teal green, some deep magenta, and some Tangelo. In my experience, Tangelo looks a little more pink than orange. I'm hoping that it'll feel sufficiently different from the deep magenta though. Ideally it would be perfect if I could get the colors in these swatches themselves, but realistically, things will probably be a little different, but we can always modify the colors as we get the first look of the yarn in the jars.
I measured out around 0.27 to 0.3 grams of each of these colors. Since we will be dyeing about 33 grams of yarn in each color, approximately, this will give us a little bit under a 1% depth of shade for each of these 3 colors. I did this measuring while wearing safety glasses, a respirator, and I used everything I'm using is dedicated for dye and isn't used for food. I did the measurements by weight versus by volume, and so I did use a digital scale for the measurements.
I dissolved the dye into some warm tap water, and I am adding enough water so that they're a little over halfway full. Having an approximately the same volume in each one. Now I'm coming in with our pre-soaked yarn. Full disclosure, I did end up pre-soaking everything for a couple days. Now there is no acid here in the jars at the moment, and I am just picking up one of those sections at a time and starting to lower it in, if I can. Hello, there we go. So again, our water is currently warm, but I am not worried. There is no acid in here yet. And if we end up getting, I mean, we're gonna have tonal stripes anyway. But I'm now focusing on slowly adding everything into the jars and coming back with these spoons to sort of stir things up and make sure that, like, at first we want the color to access as much of our fiber as possible. Okay. And now we've got our middle section, and I might need to do a little bit of some gymnastics to get these colors in. There, that's actually not so bad. We're definitely going to want to make sure that we have some color going up on these middle sections, and we will start working on that now. Okay, I've got 2 cups of water right here, and I added 4 tablespoons of white vinegar, and I am going to start adding this to each of the jars. Now, if the minis were smaller, I would raise and lower them, but they're not that small. So what I'm gonna do is I am working on covering some of these intermediate sections. Now that we have some acid in here, if I had started doing that before, then without any acid, then, you know, we might not, you want the acid on those intermediate sections. If we had started doing that earlier, then it's possible we wouldn't get the color set over there. Okay, so we've added about a half a cup of this mixture to everything. I am stirring up and making sure the intermediate sections have color. Now we'll do the pink, stir up. There's definitely more acid at the top than the bottom, but again, we're doing the best we can to stir things up. And with this orange, I have to say I am so happy with these colors right now. I am just absolutely thrilled. Okay, and that zip tie, well, you're just gonna have to hang out in there. I think what I want to do is just add, I guess I don't have quite enough. It's okay if there's a little bit more in one jar than the rest. I am fine with that, but I think I am gonna go and try to raise the water until it's just below the threads of these cups. There's no more acid in here, but except for like what was left over here in the mug. But yeah, I mean, I think the colors, oh dear. The color is definitely going to start striking right away, just from my experience with both these colors and the yarn, but I'm hopeful. Oh, good. I was like, oh no, I see some really light pink. The ties that I used on here were acrylic, so no, everything is good. Now we need to go heat set it. And I can't exactly pick up all of this at the same time. So I'm gonna do my best and transfer the yarn into this pasta insert, and then doing my best to put the yarn back where it needs to go. I highly recommend a multi-pot like this if you can get your hands on one. The fact that I can place this directly into a water bath is really helpful. I do want to increase the water level. These jars are taller than the pot that the pasta insert is sitting in, but I want the water level to at least go to like 2/3 of the way up the jars. And now I am going to cover this, and we are gonna heat this for a while to let the colors set. And I hope you are so excited about these bright summery colors and that you'll really enjoy this self-striping yarn. I would say that we want to heat this for about 30 minutes, but it's gonna take some time for the pot to heat up. It is room temperature right now, maybe even on the cool side, so it's just gonna take some time and we're gonna have to be patient. Therefore, I am going to wait an hour. If I notice that the pot starts boiling, then I will reduce the heat to low, but we'll be back in an hour. Let's remove our lid. The yarn has risen up, and actually I can see, even though you guys can't see, the yarn is sort of all floated up towards the surface, but that means I can see that the dye has cleared in all three of these situations, which is awesome. And these colors are exactly what I wanted. I am so unbelievably thrilled with it. I'm definitely gonna play with these three colors together more. I am in in love with this. I hope you guys like it as well. So I've just turned off the heat, and now we need to wait for this to cool. We could remove it completely from these jars right now. And in fact, I think, well, I might let this cool down a little bit, and then I can lift up the pasta insert, so that way we can set the jars aside and that'll start to cool a little faster. But I do want it, it's so long and a little unwieldy that I do want to let it cool before we remove things from the jars. The yarn is still a little warm, but I can comfortably touch it. I'm going to take all of these midpoints once again and secure it, just because it will help things stay a little more organized. And a little less likely that I could tangle the whole thing. Okay, and I'm not over a pot anymore, so I should be careful. But I'm gonna set this aside. Ta-da! Our pretty yarn. But you can see that our dye baths have cleared completely. Now that the yarn has finished cooling, let's go ahead and wash it. I'm not expecting any bleeding here today. I'm going to try to not move things in a bad way so it gets tangled. We'll keep those fingers crossed. But now we're going to use some clear dish soap. The water that I'm washing with is cool. If you were to see some bleeding, then one thing I like to do is add a bunch of vinegar and maybe fill up the basin with hot water to let it soak for a little bit. But that is definitely not the case here today. So anyway, I'm now going to rinse out the soap, put the yarn through my spin dryer, and then hang it up to dry. Here is a fun little sneak peek of what our self-striping pattern will look like. I am thrilled with the saturation, with the colors, with the way that the Dyer Supplier 8020 blooms once it is dyed. I'm really happy. This yarn does bloom with dyeing. Some bare yarns can look a little more stretched, a little flat in the bare form, and then you'll see that they sort of fluff up and you can see that definition in the plies a lot better after you have dyed it. This is something that I've observed in the Dyer Supplier 7525 and 8020 in the past, but I love how the yarns look once they have been dyed. Is this shrinking? I'm not really sure. It's not the same as felting a sweater and ending up with something super tiny. The yarn isn't felted at all and could probably still be blocked to be stretched again. I think it has to do with some of the memory that wool has. Either way, each of these color repeat sections is still well over 2 yards, approaching 3. I don't have a firm measurement on this skein today, but we still have plenty of yardage, I think, to give us good size stripes. Now we need to go wind this back into a single skein, so that way it is more functional and usable, and so we can make a swatch of Anne's beautiful yarn. Here are the pieces to my DIY warping board. I used some railing sort of balusters that I got from just Home Depot, and in them we drilled some 1/4-inch holes and added some pegs in with wood glue. On 2 of the railings we have pegs that are a few inches apart, like so, but then on either end we do have holes drilled through. On 2 of the balusters I just have 3 pegs a little off center, but then coming out of either end we have a peg, and there are 2 of these. This allows me to slide the warping board together and to take it apart to store it flat when it is not in use. It is not perfect by any stretch, but if you have a drill and some wood glue, this is something that a lot of people can manage. Okay, and then I can flip it over. Then I can flip it over and add the last piece to the other side. giving us this square that we can use to either make really, really, really long skeins or to, in an organized way, unravel them into a smaller skein once again. Okay, so let's see what we can do. To set this back up, I'm going to just place one side over the top, and with the other, we're going to go up and down as many times as we need to. This arrangement is separate from how I placed the yarn on originally, but it is a reasonable way to unravel things again. A full tutorial where I show you how I use the warping board to make a really long skein is coming. I wanted to practice with it a bit more to get the hang of it and how I like to use it before I sort of break everything down with the vlog of how we made it. Especially because that vlog is definitely missing pieces because I didn't film everything. Now I know we have some funny business going on with last tie, but I am going to remove it now. Hopefully it won't be an issue. Okay, and now we can unravel our skein really easily. You can do this, oops. You can do this as you go winding directly onto the niddy noddy, but I just want to show now, once we have all of those twists worked out, it is really easy to go back and forth and around. So whether you undo around and then go onto the niddy noddy, or you just unwind a little at a time, there's some personal preference, but you will get a rhythm down to create your stunning self-striping yarn onto something that is more manageable. Okay, I've officially now seen that our striping is not going to be perfect. And here's why. Here's one of those loops, and you can see that this orange is touched by pink on both ends. So we'll have a full-size orange stripe, but it'll be surrounded by two pinks. And I think that what we're going to see on this other side is going to be the reverse. Yeah, it looks like we're going to have orange surrounded by green. This is not the end of the world, but it does disrupt the green, pink, orange striping pattern, because somewhere in there will be a pink, orange, pink, and then this pattern will be reversed for a little bit, and then there'll be a green, orange, green, and it'll put the striping pattern back into the same direction. I'm curious to see how close those are together. I haven't actually hit that yet when I'm unraveling. Hopefully it'll be really close together so it'll minimize the impact of that mistake. I'm sorry, Anne. I just now hit the first reverse. This is how much yarn that is on the niddy noddy. Most of the yarn is on the niddy noddy. There are not that many stripes left. But I'm curious to see how far, how many sections there are, orange sections there are before the pattern gets reversed again. So this mistake is the closest to the pink end. Okay, so this is our switchback, which should give us a similar sized orange stripe to what we have otherwise. Okay. And let's see, I'm curious if it'll be this next one. It is! Oh my goodness. There isn't even one full repeat. So we have a section that goes orange, it goes pink, then orange, pink, green, orange, green, pink. So it's sort of as short as possible for the mistake to be. That is unbelievable. So Anne, you can either cut that out entirely since the section is not that big, thank goodness. Or you can start from the orange end, knowing that this mistake is closer to the pink end of the yarn, or you can leave it in as sort of a fun Easter egg in the yarn. But this is a reason why it's important to pay attention as you're winding the skein. And yeah, but I'm gonna go finish winding it off camera. And now that we're done, sometimes it takes a little effort to figure out which end you can take off, but this thing stores really, itself flat, which I don't know about you, for you, but for me, this is a big, big plus. And part of the reason why we designed it this way. Whew. Here is what our stunning skein looks like. And Anne, once again, the error in the striping pattern is closer to the pink end than the orange. So depending on how much yardage you need for a pair of socks, it could be worth starting at the orange if you want to potentially avoid the striping mishap. And of course, maybe you aren't going to make socks at all. So I don't want to be too presumptive here. Now it is swatch time, but I wanted to show you guys what the finished skein looks like, just skeined up, before I go and see what our striping sections look like. Swatch time! I knit this flat swatch using 2.75 millimeter or US size 2 knitting needles. 40 stitches back and forth. If you were going to be making a sock, the stripes would probably be narrower because you likely would be using more than 40 stitches. So I just wanted to throw that out there. The stripes are subtle and tonal, and it looks like on the swatch we've got about 6 rows for each of the color sections. I made sure to go through one entire color repeat so that way we could see, but we were able to get stripes that are approximately the same size, which is awesome. I am so thrilled with how this colorway turned out, and I hope that you guys are as well. Mistakes aside, mistakes happen, but the colorway is stunning, and I know I want to play with these 3 colors more in the future. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and if you enjoyed this video, like, subscribe, turn on notifications, and leave a comment below. What 3 colors would you like to incorporate into your perfect 3-stripe self-striping yarn? If you love the colors I create and also want to help support the content here on this channel, go and check out all of the listings in the ChemKnits Creations Etsy shop. The shop is filled with yarn featured in these videos. This particular yarn is going to today's sponsor, Anne, but there are a lot of other options, and all the listings even have the title of the video, so that way you can go back and watch how I created it all over again. And thank you so much for sponsoring this video. I am just really, really thrilled with how all this came together and how well it worked. And since there was a mistake, it's actually fairly short. At least we don't have like a third of the whole skein that's in a reverse color repeat. So, phew! I feel like this striping pattern is bold enough, even with only the 40 stitch swatch, that I could try to do 4 colors within this same sized skein, and that we could have some success. So it's definitely worth playing around with your striping to decide how big you want your stripes to be. Maybe even knit a row at the gauge you prefer when you're knitting socks. Measure that length of yarn that goes into one round, and then use that to calculate how large of a skein you want to create the self-striping yarn that you desire. Now that we see how well this has worked, I have some fun variations I want to try, and I'm really, really excited to explore this further. Thank you so much for watching, everyone.